Hello and welcome to this very special edition of Diverse and Inclusive Leaders, the show where I interview the most inspirational and thought-provoking leaders of today and unearth their unique stories of diversity and inclusion to help inspire, educate and motivate others to make the world a better place. Today I'm honoured to be joined by Edwin Booth, CBE. Edwin is the CEO and chairman of Booth Food Stalls in the north of England. I'm really looking forward to talking to Edwin today, to uncovering some of the unique family history behind the brand and finding out more about Edwin and some of the work that he's been doing more personally, both within the business and also on the charitable side. Welcome to the show, Edwin.
Good morning.
Morning. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Oh, it's a great pleasure. It really is.
The pleasure is all ours. And so obviously you're a very well-known face in the north of England, but it would be great if you might just be able to share with some of our listeners and our viewers today a little bit more about you and perhaps the business as a whole, because of course you are the fifth generation now that has run this business since 1847, I believe.
Indeed so. And I think when you join a business like this, you have a massive weight of responsibility to the person whose idea it was in the first place. Mm-hmm. My great-great-grandfather, Edwin Henry Booth, who himself was a fascinating person in that he was an orphan boy from the age of 11, having run away from home and become an errand boy in Manchester. And over the ensuing years, learnt the hard way how to actually earn a living or to be able to at least buy a new shirt front, and then eventually take an apprenticeship with a grocer in Preston called Threlfall. And it was through that he was sent eventually to Liverpool to learn about the tea trade. Tea was a very, very valuable and important commodity in trade in those days. Mm-hmm. And when he came back to his employer had originally decided he was going to build a store in Blackpool, an emerging resort, if you will, on the Lancashire coast. And then he found that his employer couldn't afford to do that. And Edwin actually had a small legacy coming to him from his true father, because he was born illegitimate. And he was able to put that towards putting up basically a market stall in Blackpool, and that's how Booth's was founded. So when I came into the business, I was 18 years old. I'd just turned 18. I wasn't allowed to go to university because the family said that wasn't going to be very helpful to an aspiring grocer at the time. I think possibly in retrospect it might have been. It would have been a good idea to learn a little bit more about the structure of businesses and so on. But nonetheless, I was wheeled in at 18 years old into a warehouse with some magnificent Lancashire people. The boss's son, with a silver spoon hanging out of his mouth, talking public school English, with lads that call the warehouse the Warehouse, and we're talking proper Lancashire. And they took me under their wing, and I must say, being a little bit of a mimic, I soon learnt the Lancashire accent and became part of the team. And that was my welcome into Booths, before then spending time in stores, and then becoming a trainee buyer at the age of about 20, nearly 21. Wow.
Because you really carved your name out through your speciality in wine, I believe.
Yes, I always looked very enviously over my shoulder at my colleague, actually, who was tasting wine on a regular basis, and thought I'd quite like to do that. And then I took a particular interest in that, and both he and I were sent off to undertake a course with the Wine and Spirit Education Trust, which was tremendous. We tasted a lot of wine, read a lot of books and so on. And then eventually I was asked to pass over the responsibility for buying Heinz and North Swiss soups and all that sort of thing, all the fundamental things which I'd been weaned on, to take on the wine section, which at the time only had a relatively small range. And I learnt a lot about wine by accepting invitations to go and talk to people about wine and do wine tastings. My first one was in a wheel at Poulton-le-Fylde. I took my brother with me for a bit of Dutch carriage, and at the end of it found that not only could I tell people lots of things about wine, but I learnt a lot as well. And I was able to also learn a little bit about just how, if you entertain people, they absorb the information. And so as I progressed with these various wine tastings, I brought a bit of humour into it along the way. And I also took wine along, which people probably wouldn't normally think they could afford. You know, those wines on the shelf that you think, oh, I wonder what that tastes like. So I took those with me to try and get people to aspire to buying something a little bit more special. And that way, the Booth's authority in wine was born, really.
And now you have a remarkable selection across the board from all different places across the world within the store.
Well, we do. We have something like 700 wines in the business, and many of them quite eclectic and quite special. And I have to say that the young lady who actually buys the wine, Victoria Anderson, is magnificent. And I've said on a number of occasions that I feel that she almost replicates the way in which I bought the wine. She has a magnificent palate, and she has a lovely way of eking out, you know, the best wines from around the globe, and then presenting them for us to sell. Very, very proud of what she's doing, and I've spent a little bit of time abroad with her recently, introducing her to a family that I knew from years and years ago. And it was a great pleasure to taste wine with her and learn quite a lot from her too.
Oh, how lovely. And talk to me a little bit more, Edwin, about some of the kind of the culture and the rich heritage that the business has within it.
Well, I think the culture and the heritage came from the founder, who was an extraordinary young man. He was born out of wedlock to a gentleman who went on to become a director of one of the railway companies in London, and who was also a literary critic in his spare time, writing for the Manchester Evening News on the subject of Shakespeare, I believe. And Edwin had this amazing sort of philosophy from a very, very young age that if he gave the best of himself, the world would give value back to him. And so when he founded the business, he founded it on the basis that he'd try and find the best possible products and sell them in the best possible way, so display them well, and then make sure that he and his staff members treated people, everyone, as being special. And that has stuck really throughout the last 170 or so years. And it's incumbent on my generation to lead in that way and to enable people throughout the business, quite simply, to be the best they can be. It's not easy with 3,000 people, but it starts with the family, with the leader, and we need then to permeate that whole idea, that whole way of doing things through the way we behave, the way we communicate, and in terms of how we develop strategic thinking as well. We've always believed in this business, despite the fact we're of quite a reasonable scale now, that strategy is a dynamic. It has to be a living thing. It is not a stone with words carved in it. It is something which people can take to their heart, change, bring back and say, well, what about this? And isn't this a better way of doing what we talked about last year? Yes, it is. Let's do it that way now. That way, a business like this can remain modern. Because I keep reminding people that, you know, if Edwin Henry Booth was here today, you know, he would be a modernist. He had to have a USP back in 1847. He couldn't just do things the way people had done it for the last 170 years. He was thinking new, exciting, service, the best. This is what it has to be.
That's remarkable, and I think it's clear when I'm speaking with you and when I've had the opportunity to obviously meet with you in the past, there is still such a passion for kind of this personal service, and not only, you know, the importance of business and strategy and everything like this, but also actually wanting to do good and to be able to give back and really bring people along with you on the ride. Which also I wanted to just dip a little into some of your background as well, if you didn't mind me asking, because I know you've done an awful lot, you know, not just here, but also within the community. And so, and they've worked within the Lancashire universities at some of the business change programmes, as well as also chairing the business in the community advisory board for the Northwest. So I wondered whether you could maybe tell me a little bit about about these different facets and kind of how they came about, and, you know, even to being the trustee of the Prince's Countryside Fund as well, which again, you know, kind of a remarkable achievement, really.
Well, I think a lot of this is born out of the family's connection with a charity that my great-great-grandfather founded before he died, or co-founded, with some trustees here in Preston, which was a Harris Trust, which was to house orphans on what was quite a radical estate, really, where you had the orphans living with house parents in various houses on this estate with its own school, its own football pitch and cricket pitch and so on. And that was quite radical and new in those days. And my family's always had an association with it. So when I was young, I was asked to become a trustee and to become involved with the management board of that committee, or rather that charity at that time. I learnt a lot from that, and that formed really feelings that I had for people that were quite destitute and who hadn't got much of a, or seemed not to have much of a chance in life. What could we other people do to help people develop? And it was really serendipitous in many ways that I met the regional director, a lovely gentleman, very inspirational gentleman called John O'Brien, who at the time was involved with business in the community. And he said, look, your business really should be part of what we're trying to do to engage business more closely with the community at all levels, really, both in terms of engagement with school children, people who are destitute, who are less fortunate, and so on. And I joined the advisory board in Manchester and probably said a little bit too much, because they then said, look, you think we ought to chair this? And we're looking for a new chief executive at the time. And we found a wonderful chief executive called Raksha Patni, with whom we developed a scheme called Business Class, which was actively engaging businesses with schools in formal relationships over a period of time to share what the business knew about structures and organisations, and also to share with the children what it's like to actually work in that particular business, be it engineering or retailing, accountancy, whatever it would happen to be. And that was a great success, and that became a national programme. And I had the privilege of leading that group for about 8 years or so. And towards the end, through a conversation at a conference down in London, I was asked by Mark Price, who had been asked by the Prince of Wales to form a new countryside fund, whether or not I'd like to join the trust body, which I did, because this business, but the Booths business, has always had a very, very far-reaching and important relationship with producers out in the countryside and farmers. And so we already had quite an understanding of the sort of issues that the Prince of Wales wanted to address. And for the last nearly 10 years now, I've been involved with them and been able to support them in many, many ways.
And it was just shortly after this, in 2019, I think, that you then received the CBE from the Queen.
Well, that was extraordinary. I can remember the letter coming through and the family sort of saying, never mind the rest of the mail you're opening. What about this one? And I'm always the last one to open a Christmas present, and it really frustrates my family terribly. But anyway, opened it and nearly fell off my seat. Only it was just the most extraordinary thing, and it was a great privilege to actually receive the award from the Prince of Wales, with whom, through the Prince's Countryside Fund, I've done a fair amount over the years, particularly on the rural agenda, and magnificent to be recognised both for business activity and for charity as well, because to this business here, the two go hand in glove.
I couldn't agree more, and I think those are the business leaders that I have to say I admire the most, is those business leaders that are able to entwine charity and doing good and actually putting purpose at the forefront of what it is that they're doing. Because I think sometimes, you put purpose and profit, you can have the two hand in hand, actually seek to do better in this world.
Well, it does work. And going back to my forebear,
good for business as well.
Yeah, going back to Edwin Henry, this was the whole idea. He actually said, look, I believe that if I do my best for society, society will look after me. And society did, both in terms of engaging with his business and, of course, in supporting the fundraising for that original charity, the Harris Charity here in Preston. And, today, it's just as important, to be honest with you. And I think when one talks about charity, one has to be very, very careful not to patronise people who may be benefited from that charity. The dignity of the individual is always extremely important. It's something I learned a long time ago. It's not enough just to be seen to do good. You need to actually actively find a way of engaging with people to enable them to deal with whatever circumstance they have. Whether it's within a business, for example, where someone might have some personal issues which might vest in a physical disability or a mental disability. You need to work with people and not just do the accepted thing. It's actually how you do it, which is really, really important in life. And I think that has characterized this business and the attitude that pervades throughout it.
Mm-hmm. And tell me a little bit about, I'm sure I'm going to get the name wrong here, but it's the innovation room that you have here, where where you kind of have these wonderful brainstorming sessions and allow people to come to the table with different thoughts and different ideas and, anything that they really want to say, which I think is brilliant, 'cause you're almost allowing people to bring their personalities and their creative side, into the workplace.
Yeah, this was seen at the time, I think, to be, one of Edwin's wacky ideas. Oh my goodness, here he goes again.
Yeah, I remember a couple of months ago coming in and you're like, oh, I've got this room and it's brilliant. I was like, oh, tell me about it.
Well, it's huge fun. We call it the Blue Room, and it's actually decorated on all four walls like a Caribbean beach. Mm-hmm. We've got clouds on the ceiling and we've got a sandy carpet. Mm-hmm. I'm hoping that more and more people will use it. It's I think a lot of people have their own sort of blue moments around the company already, to be honest with you. But it is a safe space for people to go who are not necessarily managers. They can be anybody with an idea, a group, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 people, who can go and sit in there for an hour and really pull an idea to pieces and put it back together again. Or decide, ultimately, that something that we're doing isn't such a good idea after all, and then talk to myself and the senior directors and say, look, guys, we have a strategy, but actually this is an element of what we do that really should fall out of this, or indeed this is something new that we've discussed which we think should go into it, and so on. It comes out of the Blue Ocean Thinking idea, which was put to us very strongly by our independent non-executive Kevin Roberts, who you may know used to work for Saatchi & Saatchi as our chief executive, and who's been a massive inspiration to me personally here in this business, and a huge support to the business as a whole in terms of really believing even more in its DNA and what it stands for and the way it works. And so this is a new tool, it's a new way of doing things, and I'm hoping more and more people will actually use this in the future.
Fantastic. I think every business should have a place like this. Maybe that's something we can throw out to those who are listening or tuning in today to try and get them to create their own blue sky thinking blue room within the organisation.
Yeah, it's really important. Blue sky thinking isn't just for executives and boards. It's for everybody. And I think that's the important thing. And it's very, very important to really socialise common sense throughout a business where you have a corporate structure and you have management tiers, but there needs to be quite sort of seamless transition routes between all those tiers so that, the lions can sit down with the lambs and vice versa, and you can actually get, this sort of, it's not utopian, but it's the idea that, people can have a conversation over dinner. You can sit a director down with a checkout operator and learn so much about your business, for example. That's an extreme example, but here in this central office here, we don't have a dining room for the board. We have a private dining room for private meetings and that sort of thing, but everybody socialises and eats together. So I can be sat down with someone from accounts, someone from the payroll, I can be with a junior buyer, or indeed a senior director. And we will sit down, we won't hide away at the end of a table, we'll integrate with everybody else. And you learn so much more about the business that way.
Absolutely. I mean, this is modern leadership in its truest form. I think gone are the days where, yes, most businesses do have the natural hierarchy, but at the same time, gone are the days of kind of ivory towered kind of business leaders running the business behind a closed wooden door. What you described there is kind of the epitome of really actually allowing people to communicate, share, collaborate with each other, and actually be able to see each other as real people and as human beings, really.
I think that's an important thing, because when we go away from here, despite, whether we're not for a junior buyer or a senior director, we may be members of the same tennis club. We might both love rugby. We might love music and that sort of thing and share a common interest at which we're both very skilled, or, one more so than the other. I think what you've said is very insightful. I also think it's important to legitimize common sense throughout a business and understand that there are people at the front end of the business who may not be as highly paid, for example, as some of the senior managers who are involved with strategizing and so on. Allow those people to take decisions on the hoof, actually, in the workplace without reference to a standard operating procedure. And if you do have a standard operating procedure, make sure that it's sufficiently light touch that people can work within that framework, to make the right decisions in favor of customers who today, in today's world, are moving fast and want quick decisions. They want quick satisfaction, quicker and quicker because of the modern media that we're now using. And so that's a very, very important thing. And you said something else which really struck a chord with me. You were talking about running a business. Today, we don't run businesses, we carry out business. We do business. Running a business is rather like porridge. It's a very, very stodgy word. And it's an old-fashioned word. Doing business is about the visceral satisfaction you get from satisfying customers and making them feel good about your brand, your product, your service, whatever it happens to be, whether you're an accountant, a retailer, or manufacturing a car. It's important that the end user, the person who actually transacts, believes that that transaction goes beyond just a financial pact, if you will, that it actually, the transaction transcends that. It's about how people feel. And I'm a great believer that if we make, as a business, people feel great about what we do, then we have a sustainable business into the future.
I really love that phrase, and I think there's quite a famous quote, I can't remember who said it now, but they say people won't remember what it is that you did or what you said, but they always remember how you made them feel. And what you said there kind of epitomises that statement almost, because
I think you're right.
It's that feeling and what's in your heart that you take away with you. And I think if you can really, as Booth, and you do so well, is you capture that positive feeling that makes you want to come back because there's the personal service and you feel that you're being looked after and cared for.
Well, it is an extraordinary thing, Some years ago we asked a London house to come and look at our brand and to reconfigure how it looks and so on and so forth. And the gentleman at the time, a lovely man, John Williamson, I remember, came along and said, look, I'm going to spend some time out in the business and I'll come back with the storyboards and the ideas and so on. I honestly thought he was going to come back and be talking all about the food. And he said, no. He said, it's all about the people. It's unbelievable. I've been into one or two of your stores and they treat me like a human being. It's not like a supermarket. You shouldn't be called a supermarket. And so we developed the brand based on that, and it was a very happy brand with lots of smiling sort of cartoon animals and all sorts of things. It was great fun. We call it the Red brand. We went through that phase. And more recently, when I had the privilege of meeting Kevin Roberts, who is now a co-director, Kevin and I had lunch together, and he told me all the things that are great about the business, about the people and the feel and the rest of it and so on. And he also told me what was awful about the business as well. He said, you've got to improve your lighting, your uniform's terrible, all sorts of different things, And he put the challenge down, but at the same time, he really corroborated all the feelings I had about what was really valuable in our brand. And we have continued to develop it around people. And the purpose that we now have, the purpose on a page, which is replicated by a number of purposes, personal purposes, which my key people have, expresses very clearly the power of people. And in fact, in our spirit, we actually describe ourselves quite simply: people, product, place, in that order. The people come first. When you think about it, they decide what we're going to sell, they taste the product, they interact with the customer, and then that product itself drives the engagement with the business when it comes alive on the plate, on the dinner table at home, and that sort of thing. And then, of course, the place. We decide where we're going to trade, and then we actually configure that place in such a way as to create, hopefully, an attractive environment within which to shop. And that environment has to transmute online now. So wherever we appear online in terms of a website or a product on someone else's website or whatever, it has to present in a way which makes people feel as if this is for them. Very important. And it's quite a challenge in the digital age to do that. And it's one which we're addressing with some interest at the moment.
It's really fascinating hearing you talk about kind of the feelings and almost it's like heart-centered business almost. I think it's really very intriguing. And I guess that leads me onto, the subject around diversity and inclusion and of course belonging, which we've spoken about also. And I wondered, what does diversity and inclusion kind of really mean to you, Edwin?
Well, I think it's important for business and society as a whole to put a lot of realism behind that. Because one of the things which I do rail against is when I hear on the news someone's talking about a group of people and they describe them as black or whatever and so on. And, it's not about the colour of skin, it's about the individual. Why do we actually have to describe individuals that way? It presupposes that those people are so different from someone who's white or from Asia or whatever, that, we have to sort of immediately sort of put a different template in front of ourselves and so on. Diversity to me is about diverse characteristics, be it, ability to run fast, ability to sing well, to sell well, to buy well, or to lead well, out with any consideration from where people come in the world. It's always been my view. And I think inclusion is very, very important. And I think the quality of communication between us in organisations, in businesses, is vital. And I was always told in the past, you've got to over-communicate. And I still don't think I do it very well now, to be honest with you, because very often when a board determines to do things in a particular way, the board's been living with that conversation for weeks. And then say, right, here we go, we're going to introduce this idea to the business. And so a communication goes out. It might be a blog, it might be written, it might be a video, whatever, and so on. And then everybody sits back and says, right, we're doing this now. Meanwhile, everybody else has just heard this for the first time. They're thinking, oh my goodness, how are we going to deal with this? So you've got to keep talking about it. And you've got to allow people to absorb it and then tell you how wonderful it is. When they start telling you how wonderful the idea is, and let's face it, by then they might have tweaked and changed it slightly, then it'll fly, and it'll really, really fly. Otherwise, you will get people in your organisation playing it back to you through other channels and saying, oh, we've been told to do this. I'm not sure about that. How are we going to pay for this? How are we going to learn about this? Who's going to tell us how to do what we're going to do and all the rest of it? So I think inclusion is very much underpinned by great communication and people feeling as if they're part of something. And again, with customers, we sell quite an eclectic range of product. We're not the cheapest. We think we've got fabulous value when all's said and done, but we understand that not every single strata of society is going to be able to engage with us and buy, because we're not as cheap as discounters. But we are a very special brand, because I'm just as happy to serve someone who turns up on a bicycle, who might just happen to love our cheese and just buy 200 grams of cheese a week, as the person who turns up in the Rolls Royce and buys £250 worth of groceries a week and buys all our fine wines. So this notion of sort of inclusive exclusivity is important. We never use the word exclusive in this business because we don't exclude anybody, but we want to include people in being part of something that's special. And that's for everybody. I think we all recognise things that are special in art, in music, motor cars in showrooms, whatever they are. People will see an Aston Martin and say, oh, that's beautiful, even though they'll never ever own one, but they actually appreciate how lovely it is. And I remember many years ago talking to a friend who wanted to go and have a look at a car in a showroom in London. And he went into the door and the chap said to him, no, I don't think we've got anything for you. You don't look as if you can afford it. Now that is the antithesis to the way our brand works. It is important to be inclusive, almost to a T, really, to make sure that, people feel that they have their booths, however much money they spend.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love the way that you're kind of very welcoming to all, and I definitely think, again, I'm from the north, and so I've known Booth for many years growing up, and the family have, that it really has got that kind of warm and welcoming environment that makes you feel somewhat a little bit special, and so that's really great to hear.
Yeah, it's an important thing. It's the human dimension of living and doing business which ultimately satisfies the soul, actually. And actively going out to satisfy your own soul will never actually work. I believe that from a philosophical perspective. But doing the right thing in the right way, and doing the right thing and the hard thing sometimes is far more satisfying than actually just going for all the bits on the plate, which are the bits you like best. You know, include the whole plate in the meal, in what you're eating. You know, I think it's important to understand that life isn't just about me. It's about what you do for everybody else. And by dint of that, then you feel great. Mm-hmm. And I think from a leadership perspective, you know, a lot of people say to me, well, you know, who does a leader talk to? Mm-hmm. You know, when you're looking to sort of ask people, sort of, you know, I'm not quite sure about whether I'm doing the right thing and all the rest of it and so on. Well, actually, talk to everybody. You know, it doesn't make you weak. It makes people realise you're a human being and you have the same concerns as they do.
I think that humility is so important, and you know, there's a lot of talk at the moment, you know, in the business world about kind of having this humility and vulnerability almost, which is how you're describing it. You know, gone are the leaders in inverted commas of the past that are kind of booming, great big coming in, talking to people about what needs to be done, but actually opening themselves up as you have.
And saying, how are we going to do it?
Exactly.
How are we going to do it?
Exactly.
I think it's important. I can remember years ago, one of our senior managers was confronted with a new Sainsbury's supermarket in his town, and everybody was saying, oh, it's going to be the end of booths. I remember this fellow coming to me and saying, Edwin, I want to spend, I think it was another £70,000 a year on people in my store. And all the accountants were saying, you're going to be taking less business because there are going to be 2 supermarkets in this town. We need to cut the overhead back, and the most significant overhead in our business is people. He wanted to invest more, and I managed to persuade the business at the time we should do that. And he was remarkably successful. I don't think we lost any sales at all over 2 years. We had the initial hit, as you'd expect. Now, that gentleman on one occasion, I remember coming to see me, he said, I think I'm blowing up. I just don't think I'm doing the right thing. I just don't understand. I said, look, let's talk about this. Let's just sit down. Well, I don't feel as if I should be exposing myself this way. Why not? Let's talk about it. You know, there's always, in life, everybody goes up, they go down, they go up, they go down. The worst thing that any organisation can do is actually, when people are down, say that they've come to the end of their date code, if you will. They're on their way out. They're no good anymore. No. Everybody can be rebuilt in a new way of doing things, so that they can continue to be successful as leaders. And I liked that. I liked the fact that this gentleman was so honest at the time.
I think it's that honesty and integrity that really stabilises kind of those deep-rooted relationships and builds that trust.
Indeed.
As well. In June 2011, you were appointed the chair of the Lancashire LEP. Tell me a little bit more about that.
Well, that was an extraordinary thing, because we already had a sort of quasi-shadow board which met at Lancaster University in advance of forming the local enterprise partnership. It wasn't quite as straightforward as that, in that there were several groups around Lancashire who wanted to form their own LEPs at that time. And I had a conversation with the then chief executive and said, look, you know, from my perspective, that's ridiculous. The LEP should reflect the geography of the county and the activities within. And I said, look, I'll do it if we can just move towards one LEP. And so, you and the political leaders will have to give me some assurance that that's possible. And they did, although I must admit I did turn down the opportunity on the first occasion because it just seemed like too much to do in addition to what I was doing here. And then there was a new chief executive who came to see me and said, well, look, don't worry about what he said. By the way, you'll get full support, with legal services, secretarial and so on and so forth. And he just switched something on in my mind, which made me think, I think I could probably add some value here. And so I adopted this ready-made board, if you will, which morphed and changed a little bit over time. And really gave me the opportunity to exercise all of the feelings that I had about leadership in favour of making sure the county optimised with the leaders of the various districts and unitaries, with the executive in Lancashire County Council, the opportunity to take support, finance from central government to enact some major projects, one of which was the Preston City deal, which was a magnificent project really when all said and done for Lancashire and for the city of Preston. And there were various growth deals as well, and we worked very, very hard on those to make sure that we became the top performing shire, if you will, behind the major cities in the UK.
I was just about to say that you were awarded, that you were there positioned as the highest performing LEP.
We were, and we were, as a board, we were very, very proud of that. And I think a lot of that has to do with the quality of the relationship that we had, and still have, I hope, because I left the LEP in December, with the authorities, the 12 districts, the 2 unitaries and the senior authority. We tried very hard towards the end to form, or the LEP was trying very hard to support the emerging sort of combined authority, shadow combined authority, so to speak, which hasn't really happened yet, but I hope it does at some point in the future, because that would just complete the loop in terms of the potential for collaboration between the districts and the LEP, which is there quite simply to make sure that we pump as much oxygen into the Lancashire economy as we possibly can. And I think we've done that in many areas, be it road infrastructure, be it commercial development, being support of housing initiatives. You name it, the LEP has touched every part of Lancashire over time, and I think has shown how a shire LEP can work, because we've all heard about the cities and the devolution deals that they've had. Until the shires configure themselves politically in a more stable way, then government isn't really going to devolve further powers to them. And so that was a tremendous challenge. It remains a challenge, really. But one of the things I learned was that any sort of prejudices I may have heard or had when I was younger about the public sector, about the jobs for life and about going home at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon, all that sort of thing, were blown clean out of the water, because I worked with some magnificent people who, many of whom have become friends, and people that I feel as if I can ring up to talk about various things from time to time which I might not understand, which sort of sit very much in the public domain. And there were some wonderful people who worked extremely hard with myself and my private sector colleagues to make sure that Lancashire could be the best it could be, and Lancashire got its own purpose. We worked up a purpose on a page so that everybody working on the LEP's agenda, if you will, was pulling the same way. It was a tremendous experience for me, I must say. And my wife said to me, "You're going to really miss this, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, I am." It's one of those things which is a journey that never finishes. But there is a time for someone else to come in, take the chair, and then move it forward again. And happily, they now have a new chair, and someone who actually was involved right at the very beginning on the board, who had to leave for reasons of going to work elsewhere in the country. So I wish them well.
Wonderful. Well, you did a remarkable job whilst you were there, certainly.
Tried my best.
And just before we kind of wrap up for today, because I've learned such a lot from our conversation, but I wanted to ask just a few more questions. I'll call it a little lightning round. I know it's quite a big one to start with, but what's your secret to success, Edwin?
My secret to success is, I think, learning. One of the wonderful things about being awarded a CBE is that you then get a letter sent to you from the College of Arms, from Thomas Woodcock, who is a King of Arms, who says, "Congratulations on receiving your CBE, you're now entitled to bear arms. Shall we draw them for you?" Of course, it comes at a cost, but I discussed it with my family and said, "Well, that'd be lovely, that'd be absolutely wonderful, why not?" And then, of course, you go as a family to meet the King of Arms, and he says, "Well, what do you want on the crest?" I had no idea, really. I thought, well, it would be lovely to maybe have the Booth's lion, and we'll have him holding a sprig of tea, because, that's the foundation of our business, and we've got to get some wine in there somewhere. We need a wine trellis with some grapes and that sort of thing. And he said, "What sort of things do you like doing?" I said, "Well, I used to love flying as a hobby years ago when I had time to do it, and I love driving, I love cars." "Oh," he said, "right, we'll put some wings on the lion for your badge, and we'll have a wheel. He'll have his foot on a wheel," all this sort of thing. And he said, "Well, the lion's got to sit on something." So I said, "Well, let's have a quill, a white quill." you know. And he said, well, why do you want that? I said, because I believe in lifelong learning. So I think if there's any secret, and it's probably not a secret really, certainly isn't now, it is that you should continue to learn, because I didn't go to university. I wish I had now latterly. Both my daughters have been and enjoyed it immensely and learnt a huge amount about themselves and about the subjects that they've been studying as part of their degrees. So I've been very fortunate, really, I think, to have this yearning for, you know, more information about why things happen, what makes the world tick, what makes organisations tick, and that sort of thing. And I hope I'm still learning.
I agree. Life is a constant, it's an adventure, isn't it? We never stop learning. I think the second one stops learning, things probably become a lot more boring.
Indeed.
And what's authentic leadership to you?
Authentic leadership is leadership that can be challenged. In other words, if you're in a senior leadership position with a top team, there will be occasions when you may become very passionate about something, and you might raise your voice, and then someone in the room may be offended by that, and you know, they may sort of go all red in the face and say, well, I don't believe that, and I think we should talk about this afterwards, and all the rest of it, and so on and so forth. And the best thing you can do after that meeting is go to that person and say, look, I'm really sorry about that. I just felt so strongly about what I was saying, and it was actually built into me, that feeling, if you will. And I can remember on one occasion recently, one of my colleagues said, well, do you know, I feel the same as you, and I've just realised we're both on the same page. I said, well, that's brilliant. And he said, I'm sorry they reacted the way that I did. Oh, so that's all right, it's fine. I said, it's no bad thing that the rest of our colleagues saw that we both feel so passionately about this subject. And being authentic is being open to being hurt, being elevated, offended, call it what you will, and then dealing with it quickly, climbing down and saying, right, if you're on a rugby field and one of your own team members trips you up on the way to the try line, you don't resent that for the rest of the match. Otherwise, you won't score any more tries. You've got to climb out of that quick, bang, get back on the mission, score some more tries. Yeah? So authenticity to me is all about that. And it's actually about believing in what you do, because frankly, unless you believe in what you do, unless I like people, unless I like being with them, unless I like food and the environments within which we sell it, then I'm a sham. You know, I've got to like doing that. What else would I like doing? I'd love to sell sports cars. I would. But I wouldn't like to sell trucks particularly, because I see truck as a utility. But I get very turned on by Ferrari. I think that's wonderful. My dream when I go to bed is running a Ferrari dealership. I know I never will, probably, but if I'm lucky, I might drive one.
Mm-hmm. And is there anyone, I know that you've mentioned a number of people that have been inspirational to you throughout your life, including obviously the family, but are there any particular kind of sheroes or heroes that you've had throughout the course of your life that's particularly inspired you?
There have been probably too many to mention. More recently, I've mentioned Kevin Roberts, who is a magnificent leadership coach and a great marketer with great insight. And again, someone to whom, you know, you can say, I'm sorry, mate, I think you're wrong. And you'll never be offended by it. You know, he'll come bouncing back with another idea and whatever and so on. And I think, you know, he has taught me that even some of the greatest people in their fields in the world have got great humility. Back when I was much younger as a buyer, I was taught to fish when I was 21 years old by a gentleman called Gordon Baxter of the Baxter Soup people. And he said, look, you must come along and I'll teach you to fish. I said, well, great. So I went up to the factory, and on one occasion, subsequent to that, when I was up fishing with him for a couple of days, the weather was appalling. And he said, why don't you come and chat to my sales team? They're all in this afternoon. You could talk to them about the retail scene and about, you know, booths and all the rest of it. I said to Gordon, I said, look, I'm not the person to do this. I'm 24 years old, 25 years old. What have I got to, you know, teach these people? And so on? No, he said, from the conversation we've just had, I think you should do this. So I went in and I did that. And he said, see, that didn't hurt. No, it didn't. He inspired me to be the best I could be, because I didn't really believe in myself in those days, because you know, I came into the business as young Mr. Booth, and there were certain things the business could do and couldn't do, and I was told all those things. You know, you don't overstep that mark, you do everything, which was like a red rag to a bull in a sense. But within those constraints, it was difficult to develop as a young business person, if you will. He inspired me to challenge and to actually believe in myself, and I have huge respect for him. He sadly passed away about 2 or 3 years ago, and I had the privilege of fishing for the last time with him when he was 93 years old. So that was a wonderful friendship through business, really, if you will. And he introduced me to some other astonishing people, including a gentleman who was a leader of Safeway stores, who are no longer in the UK, but Alistair Grant, I remember very, very well, taking me to one side as a very, very young person and talking to me as an equal about the supermarket business, the grocery business. Of course, I looked up to Safeway. They were much bigger than we were. And I always admired their delicatessen. It was fabulous. You know, I always wanted to be as good as them in that particular area. And again, he took me under his wing. And so he inspired me. And there have been others along the way who I thought, gosh, I mean, the swashbuckling Richard Branson. I've read his story and all about his wonderful can-do attitude, which I know from time to time might just sort of upset the odd person along the way, but that doesn't worry him. You know, he has belief in what he's doing, and he's highly entrepreneurial on a big scale, and very, very human, and I love that.
Real personality, and I think it really shines throughout the brands that he has.
Absolutely. I'm absolutely devastated that the West Coast has lost, or is losing, Virgin trains, because I make an effort to talk to the people on the train and say, well, thank you very much for that. Oh, and by the way, will you just tell the chef that particular, scrambled egg and smoked salmon this morning was delicious. And their Eggs Benedict, I still think, is one of the best you can get. I do hope whoever operates the West Coast line is going to replicate the sheer quality of what they do, and the attitude of the people. This has made such a difference to my life going up and down the West Coast, down into Preston, or rather into Euston on occasions.
And my last question, I promise. You touched on your younger self, the young Edwin, beforehand when you were telling me about speaking with some of your mentors from the past. But is there any advice that you would give your younger self, the young Edwin, way back when, now, if you could do?
Yes, there is, most certainly. I can remember my father pulling me to one side on one occasion. I think I'd been expounding on a particular subject to some of my colleagues in the what was then the central office in the centre of Preston. And my father called me in. He didn't do it very often, but he said, Edwin, he said, I'm just a little bit concerned at the way you went about talking to your colleagues. I know you're right, you know you're right, but you didn't put it across very well. It was rather arrogant. So I was one who did tend to sort of put myself across as being a little bit highbrow, a little bit aloof, a little bit overconfident, and actually it was because I wasn't. So I put up this front. If at the earliest possible stage in life, you can drop the front, open yourself up. And there was another occasion when I can remember winging it on a wine tasting when I think we had the bank in, and my father said, you're doing a wine tasting. He said, would you like to engage our bankers in tasting some wine as well? I think we were trying to get a good deal at the time. I said, yes, fine. And my brother was with me at the time, and we were tasting some Chablis. And I was convincing these people that Petit Chablis was better than Grand Cru Chablis. Which was absolute rubbish, to be honest with you. I stood on the learning curve. But I said it with such confidence, and then my brother said to me afterwards, he said, you're wrong. I said, oh, was I? I didn't really know. And what I should have said is, just enjoy this lovely Chablis, rather than sort of thinking, well, I'm probably right. So get your facts straight. I think that's quite important. Preparation is very important, I think, for learning and preparation for any situation is vital. If you're going to go on a flight across the Atlantic, it's very heartening to know that a vast amount of the work attributable to that flight is actually the preparation before the two gentlemen or ladies get into the pointy end. That's something I learned from aviation years ago, albeit, light aviation, that if you prepare well, you fly well. If you don't prepare well, you need to be prepared for things to go wrong.
Thank you so much, Edwin. I've thoroughly enjoyed our conversation today. It's been really quite enlightening, learning some of the stories from the past, and very, very inspirational, I'm sure, to all of our listeners.
It's been huge fun, Leila. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you. I'm going to do a super quick summary just for everyone at home, because I've learned such a lot, obviously, from speaking with the remarkable Edwin, who's done so many things. I think, and I really hope everyone's enjoyed the show today and can take away some gleaming nuggets of inspiration from our fireside chat today. I think, least of all, I've certainly learnt from Edwin that there is no such thing as a dull person, and we really should be putting people at the heart of everything that we do. No matter what life throws at you, stay strong and stay true to yourself, and perhaps drop the front. As Edwin says, actually, if we really kind of embrace who we are and what we do, and we're well prepared about how we go about things, we don't need to put on that front and try and pretend to be someone that we're not. I think that is, the perfect kind of explanation almost of kind of really being true to who you are, diversity, inclusion, and also embracing belonging. I've had a really thoroughly enjoyable chat today, and I really hope that you'll join me again next week. If you would like to tune in to the show again afterwards, you can find it on www.dialglobal.org via our YouTube channel, or we'll be turning it into a podcast episode as well, so you can also check that out. Thank you so much for listening, and do make sure next time you're driving past a booth that you go in and say hello. Thank you so much for watching the Diverse and Inclusive Leaders podcast. Please do feel free to hit the like button below, or if you'd like to receive future notifications, do ping the notification bell here at the side. If you're interested in the audio version only, you can find it on the following streaming platforms. Any extra info and descriptions will be in the links below. Look forward to seeing you soon.